you know it, you're going to be taking your global final. And are you ready? Of course you're not. You need to know everything that's ever happened in the history of forever. Well, that's too much stuff. You're right, it is. So we're going to go over the most important parts, doodling it out all the way, and call it MrBettsClass Global Final Review. And even if you're not taking a test, you were probably sleeping during high school, so try to stay awake this time. Okay, on your mark, get set, learn. This is planet Earth. Scientists theorize there are many like it, but this one is ours. And unless you're a Wi-Fi enabled fish, you live on one of these 7 continents: Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Antarctica, Europe, and Australia. That was size order. Now by population. Just pop Europe ahead of the Americas and send Antarctica to the bottom, since it has no permanent residents other than the White Walkers. Moving on. Continents account for only 30% of the Earth's surface. The rest is oceans: the Pacific, Atlantic, Southern, Indian, and Arctic. Needless to say, the world is big. How big? Well, its circumference is nearly 25,000 miles. So how the heck do you figure out where you are? Latitude and longitude. Latitude lines are also called parallels because they're always parallel to each other. They run east and west and are numbered based on how far away they are from the fattest one, the equator. Longitude lines work the opposite way. They run north and south and are called meridians and are numbered based on their degrees away from the Optimus Prime meridian. Wait, just Prime meridian? Next thing you're going to tell me the Earth doesn't turn into a Mack truck or alien robot or unnecessary trilogy. Anyway, latitude changes affect temperature and longitude changes affect time. Now, if I was to add mountains and rivers and deserts and other topographical features, this would be a physical map. If I started drawing all the man-made borders and adding names, it would be a political map. And if I was to do any of the things I just mentioned, I'd be a cartographer or map maker, which leads us to our new topic, social scientists. A social scientist is basically anyone who studies the world in which humans live. You could be an archaeologist who studies artifacts or things that are man-made. Examples would include this. Got it? You might be a geographer studying the Earth's surface and how it affects humans and how we try to get back at the environment for sustaining life. Stupid environment. You could be an economist who studies, wait for it, the economy, which is how people use available resources like food and fuel and iPhones. You might be an anthropologist or someone who studies past and present cultures. You know when you look at old pictures of yourself and ask, why did I wear that? Well, that's kind of their job. Lastly, you might be a historian or someone that studies written records. If that's the case, you should probably know the difference between primary and secondary sources. Primary sources are first-hand accounts of events by eyewitnesses. Secondary sources are second-hand accounts told by people that weren't actually there. So if I wrote, I ate some sweet chicken tacos this afternoon, primary source. And if you read, the man that would later anchor the Yankees rotation liked to eat chicken tacos, that would be a secondary source, and it would be wrong, because everybody knows with my power, I need to be in the lineup every day taking advantage of the short porch. Got it? Good. Be safe, and I'll see you next time when we go into ancient civilizations. Spoiler alert, they're very old. Hola! Welcome back to MrBettsClass Global Final Review. Last time we went over the Earth and maps and social scientists, and you remember everything, right? Well, if you're prepared for class, let us proceed with ancient civilizations. But before that, we need to look at what predated civilizations and how history itself is classified. See, there's prehistory and then there's history. Prehistory is considered before the invention of writing systems, usually around 3000 BC. Speaking of BC, BC and AD is the most commonly used system to tell time. Now, time is a relative concept, and what year it is depends on what year we agree it to be. In the BC and AD system, the turnover point is the birth of Christ. Everything before is BC and after is AD. You may see the neutral BCE and CE, but it works the same way. Now, most of human history occurred in what we call the Paleolithic or Old Stone Age. Early Homo sapiens, aka us, showed up on the scene around 200,000 years ago, and we had stone tools and early art and nomadic lifestyles. Nomads are people that move with the food supply and scrounge up whatever food they can find. Basically, I eat deer, deer go that way, I go that way. And just like how a Walking Dead episode only gets good in the last 5 minutes, in the last 11,000 years, things began to change in what we call the Neolithic Revolution. Man discovered agriculture or farming and how to domesticate or raise animals. And this didn't happen overnight. For millenniums, nomads were still around with small nomadic groups existing today. But flash forward to around 3000 BC, in which we find the first civilization. Now, what usually constitutes a civilization is open to debate, but the following are traits that you'll pretty much find in all of them. There's a city of some sort now made possible by a steady food supply. To organize, there's some sort of government. For the sake of efficiency, you'll see job specialization, and this often leads to social classes, which divide people by profession or wealth, sex, race, whatever justification is used. Some sort of religion is present, providing faith, explaining authority, backing social systems. Art and architecture have a variety of purposes, and public works like roads and irrigation systems provide for the population, and of course a writing system will be in use. Most of these early civilizations popped up around river valleys because rivers are awesome. They provide transportation and fresh drinking water, and more importantly, fertile soil, which allowed people to plant crops and thus start civilizations like the Egyptians in the Nile River in northeast Africa, famous for their hieroglyphics and giant pyramids built during the period known as the Old Kingdom. And the Fertile Crescent was Mesopotamia, or land between two rivers, the two being the Tigris and the Euphrates, host to a myriad of societies, many that use cuneiform writing. The well-planned Harappan civilization of India was around the Indus River and had to deal with seasonal winds called monsoons, just as people in the region must do today. And early Chinese societies developed around the Yangtze and Yangtze River. Features such as mountains and deserts often led to isolation and at times ethnocentrism in China, but they're hardly the only ones to dabble in a little ethnocentrism. While these societies were very different, they also had similar traits. They were polytheistic, believing in many gods. They also had traditional economies. If they had to buy anything, it was through the barter system, exchanging goods since money wasn't a thing. And that's if they had anything extra. Most people engaged in subsistence agriculture, meaning they only grew just enough to get by. And take a look at your parents. Back then, whatever their job was, would probably be yours. I'd hope my dad was an astronaut. So that's mankind's humblest beginnings. In episode 3, we'll cover classical civilizations. Be safe, and I'll see you next time. It's episode 3 of MrBettsClass Global Final Review. Take your seats because we got a lot to go over, and if you've been absent, click here to catch up. Everybody else, let's go! Today we're going to talk about classical civilizations, the older civilizations that left lasting effects culturally, politically, and socially on history. One classical civilization was in China during the Han Dynasty, but let's begin with the Shang Dynasty, which started around 1600 BC. This dynasty, or family of rulers, had polytheistic religion, the yin and yang, and the veneration of ancestors. Next, the Zhou took over, saying that they had the mandate of heaven, or the god's approval to rule. Then the short but crazy Qin, led by Shi Hongdai, he was a legalist, thinking all men evil and needing to be controlled, connected many walls into a great wall, and probably died from mercury poisoning while seeking immortality. Then came the classical Han Dynasty. During the Han, China massively expanded and created the civil service exam. Open to all men, it was meant to get the most wise and qualified into government positions. The philosophies of Confucius, stressing order and filial piety, aka loyalty to your parents, were major parts. The remnants of the early Indus civilization were taken over by Aryan people from the West, and their merging cultures created classical India. It's also where the complex social class system of castes originated. These castes separated society into strict groups. You were born into your caste, and the only way to leave was to die. The whole system was reinforced by the Hindu religion, but we'll get into that next time. The first major dynasty of India was the Maurya dynasty from 321 BC to 185. The founder, Chandragupta Maurya, was a harsh but effective warrior, and his son Asoka was a kind Buddhist who united the diverse people. Subsequent rulers were not as good, and the empire broke up, and in AD 320, the Gupta dynasty united the north. This golden age gave us the concept of zero, early vaccinations, and the development of Sanskrit writing. Over in Greece, the mountains, jagged coastline, and many islands led to the development of city-states, or individual societies with their own governments and customs. Ancient Greece wasn't a country as much as it was a collection of individual societies linked by language and religion. It would only come together during times of war, like during the Persian War, but might then turn around and fight each other, like in the Peloponnesian War. During the classical period, which includes the 5th and 4th century BC, the city-states of Sparta and Athens were usually top dogs.
This is Sparta!
And it was historically a militaristic society. Over in Athens, democracy, or a form of government in which citizens can vote, originated. Greece is also famous for its philosophers like Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato, and writers like Homer. Eventually, a Macedonian from the north, Alexander the Great, was able to conquer all of Greece and create a Hellenistic empire in Peggy, Persia, Egypt, Greece, and India. But after he died, the empire broke up and the glory of Greece went to ancient Rome. Located on the Italian peninsula, Rome at its height controlled all of the Mediterranean area, Europe up to Scotland, and eastward into Mesopotamia. Rome's government started as a republic, or a government in which representatives worked on behalf of the citizens. Eventually, tensions between the upper-class patricians and lower-class plebeians, as well as extremely powerful generals like Julius Caesar, led to Rome becoming an empire. Starting with Augustus in 27 BC, a Pax Romana, or Roman peace, lasted for 200 years. Roman law, with concepts like innocent until proven guilty, has influenced Western law. Bridge-like aqueducts delivered water to cities. Roman, as well as Greek architecture, is heavily used in the modern world. But all things must end, and Rome ended for a variety of reasons. Invading tribes, an overstretched empire, corruption, inflation, take your pick. Though one can make the argument that Rome did carry on past the 5th century in the form of the Byzantine Empire. But as Rome ended, so too shall this lesson. Remember to subscribe and get ready for episode 4 when we discuss world religions. Be safe, and I'll see you next time. Hello, it's MrBettsClass Global Final Review Episode 4, and today we're going to cover world religions. A religion is an organized collection of beliefs concerning spirituality and sometimes morality. But why have religion? Religions, as well as actually being believed in, help people make sense of their world. And today we're going to review 5 of the most influential. First, let's talk about Hinduism. Originating in ancient India, Hinduism is the oldest practiced religion in the world. It features deities like Vishnu and Shiva and my personal favorite, Ganesha. The goal of Hinduism is to achieve moksha. That's when your Atman, your essential self, is united with the all-powerful universal force called Brahman. In order to do this, you must follow your Dharma, or religious and moral duties that change depending on what caste you're born into. If you do, you'll have good karma. So following Dharma equals good karma equals moksha, right? Well, good karma means you might be reincarnated or reborn as something closer to moksha. This belief in Dharma backed the caste system, but some at the bottom of the pyramid weren't too thrilled. Enter Buddhism. Buddhism was started by a Hindu prince named Siddhartha Gautama. One day, Gautama went outside the palace and saw a sick man, an old man, and a dead man. He wanted to find the root of suffering, and after meditating under a tree, boom, it came to him, and he became the Buddha, or Enlightened One. He called his answer the Four Noble Truths, which said all life is suffering because of desire, which can be cured by following the ways of the Eightfold Path. This moral and spiritual code would lead to nirvana, or union with the universe. And while reincarnation was available, if you led a good life, you could reach your goal quickly, making it really popular with the lower castes in India, and it also spread throughout Asia. Now, unlike Hinduism, Buddhism isn't polytheistic. Some versions are animistic, meaning not just humans, but all things like animals, plants, and even geographical features have spirits. Now our next 3 entries are monotheistic. First is Judaism. Judaism was the religion of the ancient Hebrews living in the Fertile Crescent. They believed that they were the chosen people of their one God called Yahweh. This divine covenant or agreement was made between God and Abraham, and since then being sometime in the 2nd millennium BC, there's been this idea of a promised land. One of the most famous stories in Judaism involves Moses. The adopted son of Egyptian royalty, he found out he was really Jewish and led Jewish slaves to their freedom in what's called the Exodus. Along the way, God gave Moses his law, the 10 Commandments, a moral and religious code, and they eventually settled in current-day Israel. That's not to say that they were there the whole time. About 2,000 years ago, they were chased out in what's called the diaspora. Next is Christianity and Jesus Christ. Born in Palestine, Jesus' mother was named Mary, and his father, his true father, was said to be God. He grew up Jewish, and around age 30 he started preaching. A lot of his message followed Jewish traditions, but other parts differed, like forgiveness over harsh punishment, eternal salvation, and the whole Son of God thing, which disturbed some locals as well as the ruling Romans, who saw him as a revolutionary. He was executed via crucifixion, but was said to have risen from the dead. His followers became missionaries, spreading the new religion called Christianity, which eventually became not just the official religion of Rome, but the most practiced religion today. Our final religion, Islam, is also an Abrahamic religion, linked with Judaism and Christianity. Just like how the Holy Jewish Torah is part of the Christian Holy Bible, ideas like monotheism, Abraham, the 10 Commandments, and even Jesus, albeit downgraded to prophet status, are shared by Islam's followers called Muslims. Islam was started by a prophet named Muhammad, who said he received God's word, which can be read in their holy book, the Quran. Living in polytheistic Mecca, Muhammad and his monotheistic message were chased out of town in 622 AD. He went to nearby Medina, gained a massive following, and returned to Mecca. Islam quickly spread across Africa and Asia in the form of two main sects, Sunni and Shia. Traditions vary, but all Muslims were expected to follow the 5 pillars, which include the declaration of faith, daily prayer, charity, fasting during the Ramadan holiday, and the Hajj to Mecca. Religions, whether you believe in them or not, are important to studying history because they help understand many of history's motivations and justifications. Speaking of justification, be sure to subscribe for episode 5, Legal Systems and the Byzantine Empire. Be safe, and I'll see you next time. The bell is rung. Take your seats. It's MrBettsClass Global Final Review, and we've reached episode number 5, Legal Systems and the Byzantine Empire. Let's get into it by asking a question. How do you know what is right and what is wrong? Well, it sounds like a simple question, but in reality, right and wrong depends on what filter you're looking at it through. Are you making your decision morally, ethically, or legally? See, the words morality and ethics are often used interchangeably, but there is a difference. Now, you probably won't need to know this for the test, but you will need to know it for life. Morality is concerned with your principles of right and wrong. It defines your personal character and is generally unchanging. Ethics are a collection of morals, but they can change depending on the context of the group that you're in. Think of it this way. Say you're a public defender and you're assigned to defend, Shi Hongdai. Now, morally, you can't stand this man, what with all the secret policing and burying people in the Great Wall and burning books and irresponsible time traveling. But as his lawyer, you ethically have to do your best to defend him. In that case, ethics trump your moral code. But as Omar said,
man's gotta have a code.
So you have morals that may or may not become ethics, and ethics that may or may not become laws. Laws are regulations established by a community, and they're backed by some kind of authority and generally are concerned with the relationship between that authority and individuals. So why have laws? Well, you little anarchist, without getting all enlightenment-y on you, as civilization started, laws were needed to provide security and stability. It's hard to work as a group if everyone's always worried about their stuff being stolen or having their heads bashed in. One of the earliest legal systems was written in ancient Mesopotamia by the Babylonian king Hammurabi. His Code of Hammurabi was a collection of 282 laws, some delivering harsh eye-for-an-eye justice, some not really just, because often the upper class got slaps on the wrist while the lower classes were lucky to lose only a hand. Another notable legal code was the 12 Tables of Rome. During the mid-5th century BC, with Rome still all republic-y, there was a lot of confusion as to what was legal and what was not, and it's hard to follow the law if you don't know what it is. So the 12 Tables were a set of laws organized into 12 sections, engraved on metal tablets, and displayed at the Roman Forum so they would be known to all Roman citizens, citizens only being the adult free Roman men. But these and subsequent laws of Rome were not lost when Rome fell. They were preserved by what's known as Justinian's Code. Now, let's rewind to the Roman Emperor Constantine. By 330 AD, the empire had been split into a western and eastern section, and Constantine decided to change the capital from the city of Rome in the west to the city of Byzantium in the east, which he renamed Constantinople because modesty. Western Rome would fall and become medieval Europe, but the glory of Rome would live on in the form of the Byzantine Empire in the east. One of its earliest emperors, Justinian, had the traditional Roman laws codified, and when Europe finally got its act together, they used Justinian's Code as a template for their legal systems. But that's not the only way the Byzantine Empire has affected history. They're also responsible for a ton of cultural diffusion, or spreading of ideas, customs, and technology from one culture to another. An example of cultural diffusion today would be the fact that I can get McDiarrhea in 122 countries. Also, the Byzantine made a Cyrillic alphabet which spread and is still used in Russia today. And being located in a Greek area, Byzantine Christianity mixed with local culture to make the Eastern Orthodox religion. Eventually, this sect differed so much from Roman Catholicism in the West that the two split in what's known as the Great Schism. And if you want to see the most famous Eastern Orthodox church, the Hagia Sophia, you better head to Istanbul, because that's what the Ottoman Turks renamed the city when they conquered the Byzantines in 1453. Well, there we are, halfway done. Click here for a playlist of all the lessons, because you never know when I'll throw a pop quiz. What? Nothing. Be safe, and I'll see you next time. Jumbo! which means hello in Swahili. It's MrBettsClass Global Final Review Episode 6, Africa and Islamic Expansion. Today we're going to remove our Eurocentric hats, take a look at the birthplace of man, and explore a civilization that was thriving while the crumbs of the Roman Empire were just trying to get by. Just wanted to remind you to take the pop quiz and learn how you can win your very own MrBettsClass video. Alright, let's start with the second largest continent on Earth, Africa. This is Africa. Geographically speaking, it's pretty diverse, but considering it's 5,000 miles tall, that should be expected. We can separate Africa into 4 climate zones, with the largest being the savanna, or grasslands. Yeah, you thought I was going to say the jungle? Nope. The jungle, or more appropriately the rainforest, is the 3rd largest zone. Deserts, namely the Sahara in the north and the Nambed and Kalahari in the south, are the 2nd largest zones, and due to climate change, both natural and man-made, are growing bigger in a process called desertification. The last and smallest zone is in the north and is appropriately named the Mediterranean zone. Now, it's thought that early Homo sapiens lived in Africa, and about 70,000 years ago they slowly but surely started to migrate or move. Also, remember that one of the earliest and greatest societies in history was also in Africa, the Egyptians. Everyone always forgets that Egypt's in Africa. The linguistically united Bantu people of West Africa had a major effect on African culture as well. Around 500 AD, they started to migrate south, probably in search of better farmland, and over the next 1,000 years, they made it to the southern tip and spread their Bantu language. Now, 3 great civilizations of West Africa were Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. All 3 of these societies rose to power because they controlled the gold and salt trade. Gold because it was the most valued currency, and salt because you need it in your diet so as not to, die. The Kingdom of Ghana, located around the Niger River, controlled this trade and thus controlled Western Africa until the 1100s. By 1250, the Kingdom of Mali had taken over, as well as a relatively new religion, Islam. Mali's most famous ruler was Mansa Musa, the richest person ever, and when he undertook his Hajj, he gave away so much gold in Cairo that it disrupted the economy for 10 years. By the late 1400s, the Songhai had taken over the area, including the city of Timbuktu, possibly the leading center of learning at the time. Remember how I said that Islam had spread to West Africa by the time of the Mali? Well, it spread to other places too. Well, soon after Muhammad's death, there was some question over who would lead the religion, resulting in the Sunni and Shia sects. There was also doubt that the religion could last by some Arab non-Muslims. Yeah, the words Arab and Muslim, they don't mean the same thing. You wouldn't call Indonesia, the country with the most Muslims in the world, Arab. Maybe you would. Americans aren't very good at geography. And Islamic people countered by forging armies, first defensive, then offensive. Quickly, they took over the entire Arabian Peninsula, eastward to the Indus River, west across North Africa, and even Spain and Sicily. Conquered people who didn't want to convert had to pay a jizya or tax, but normally they were accepted into society. Many empires sprung up in this new Islamic world, including the Umayyads, the Abbasids, and various Turks, the most famous being the Safavids and the Ottoman Turks, who brought down the Byzantine Empire in 1453, and whose own empire would last until World War I. In India, the Islamic Mughal Empire was started in 1526, whose famous ruler, Akbar the Great, was known for promoting tolerance, reforming government and social practices, and for his grandson's tomb for his late wife, the Taj Mahal. This example of Islamic Indian cultural diffusion is just one incredible contribution of the Islamic world. During Islamic's golden age, from mid-8th century to mid-13th century, Muslim empires made advances in architecture, literature, preserved ancient Greek philosophy, developed early algebra, were skilled in astronomy, created early credit systems for trade, and made medical advancements like cataract surgery, stopping infections, and even made medicine taste good. This golden age would last until the Mongols took Baghdad in 1258, but we'll cover that in the next episode, as well as the Tang, the Song, and Japan. Don't forget to like, subscribe, make up your quiz, be safe, and I'll see you next time. No time to waste, it's MrBettsClass Global Final Review episode number 7, and today we're going to head out east again, pick up where we left off in China, and cover the land of the rising sun, Japan. Reminding you again to click here to take your quiz and win your own episode of MrBettsClass. Alright, here we go. We've already covered early Chinese dynasties such as the Shang, the Cao, Qin, and the Han. Well, starting in the 600s and lasting until the 1200s, China experienced a golden age. The first of the 2 golden age dynasties was the Tang, who turned neighboring lands like Vietnam, Tibet, and Korea into tributary states, which could remain independent but still had to send riches or resources to China in tribute. The second of the Golden Age dynasties was the Song, which really saw the growth of trade along the Silk Road. Now, the name implies just one road, but the Silk Road was really a series of trade routes, both land and sea, linking China all the way to the Middle East. Along this road, a lot of Tang and Song innovations that would later be used and attributed to the Europeans were spread, such as gunpowder, mechanical clocks, block printing and movable type, compasses, and the spinning wheel. During the Tang and Song, the civil service exam was still used, but soon a great threat came down from the north. On the steppes of Central Asia, a boy named Temujin was born. Spending his early years in captivity, he would escape, get revenge, and later be elected the supreme ruler of his people. Wait for it, the Mongols. We know him as Genghis Khan. Using strict discipline and superior skills in warring and riding, the Mongols created the largest continuous empire in history that included China, Central Asia, as well as much of Russia and the Middle East. After his death, his empire was divided into 4 khanates. His grandson Kublai Khan even created his own dynasty called the Yuan, in which he kept his ruling Mongols separate from the Chinese people. He did, however, welcome many foreigners, such as the African traveler Ibn Battuta and a certain Italian fellow.
Mario!
Not him. Marco. Exactly. Their tales of Asian customs and goods would spark a great interest from the Europeans. But the Mongols were a nomadic people, despised by the Chinese they ruled and warring with each other. In 1368, they were pushed back behind the Great Wall and the Ming Dynasty would start. For a while, the economy and culture flourished and China was interested in exploring the world. The Admiral Zheng He and his gigantic ships voyaged all the way to the tip of southern Africa, and perhaps even further, but after his death, China isolated itself once more, and we turn our attentions north. Sorry, Korea, you don't get much love in the first half of global history other than being a cultural bridge between China and our next subject, Japan. Geographically, Japan is an archipelago, or chain of islands, with irregular coastlines, many mountains, and few flat plains. They often use terrace farming, carving flat areas into mountains, much like a civilization on the other side of the world that we'll learn about later. The traditional religion of Japan is Shinto, similar to African animistic religions in which living and non-living things in nature have spirits. Later, Buddhism would be introduced and incorporated, and the two would make up the 2 major religions of Japan today. Now, it's said that Japan takes the best from the world and makes it her own, and this can be seen not just in the Buddhist influence, but also from the early Chinese influence on writing and tea ceremonies. Much of Japanese history saw the prevalence of clans, creating a feudal system where local lords ruled their land but owed allegiance to a greater lord. At the top of society was the emperor, but the real power resided with the shoguns, or military generals. Below them were wealthy nobles, the daimyos, who were given land in exchange for loyalty and service. They employed warriors named samurai who followed a code of honor called the Bushido. Now definitely keep that last paragraph in mind because we'll almost hear the same exact thing next time when we go over the Middle Ages in Europe. Take your quiz, be safe, and I'll see you next time. Good morrow, noble squires! It's MrBettsClass Global Final Review, episode number 8, and today we're going to examine what happened to Europe after the fall of Rome, the Middle Ages, as well as the Renaissance that followed. Now, the defining feature of the Middle Ages, roughly from 400 to 1400 AD, is feudalism. Similar to feudalism in Japan, it was an exchange of power and land for loyalty and service. At the top was a king who would dole out large estates or fiefs to lords who would divide them up further, giving pieces to lower vassal lords who would employ warrior nobles called knights. The feudal system provided stability, order, and structure to a disorganized, decentralized Europe. But as always, the bulk of the people were at the very bottom of the social pyramid, whether they were peasants or serfs, which are essentially peasants that couldn't leave the manor they worked on. While this system of manorialism may seem akin to slavery, remember that it was a dangerous world out there and the manor provided protection. They were self-sufficient too, which explains why trade took a nosedive at first, but started to perk up with new technologies like iron plows and windmills and the 3-field system. Eventually, this brought about an agricultural revolution, which in turn led to a commercial revolution. Now, while no king was able to fill the power vacuum left by the fall of Rome, one organization could. The Roman Catholic Church. They crowned kings, they taught the few schools that existed, and they had the power of excommunication, or the ability to kick people out of the church and make all self-respecting Christians shun the exiles. At the top was the Pope, or at times, popes. The Pope and the Catholic Church expected taxes or tithes from European leaders of kingdoms like France and Britain, and might even call them into service like during the Crusades. A series of wars starting in 1096, they were initially about pushing back advancing Islam and retaking the Holy Land, but eventually devolved into a big mess that sometimes pitted Christian church versus Christian church. So why would anyone fight in them? Other than being told to by the Pope and King, it offered a break from feudalism, might get your sins forgiven, and there's always looting and plundering. Can't forget about the looting and plundering. It also helped promote cultural diffusion between Europe and the Islamic world, which increased trade and helped lead to the Black Death. Yay? The Black Death or bubonic plague was actually a global epidemic. It most probably started in China circa 1200, the time of the Mongol takeover. And over the course of the next century or so, it would make its way westward on the backs of rats stowing away on ships using the Silk Road. It hit Italian Europe first, and in about a decade wiped out 1/3 of the continent's population. But let's look at our Silver Linings playbook. With 1/3 less people, the value of a serf went up. Some of them abandoned the manors and headed towards towns, looking for opportunities, which led in a way to the birth of capitalism. Perhaps the most important thing killed in the plague was feudalism's hold on Europe. Nowhere was this seen more than where the plague in Europe had started, the Italian kingdoms. Because Italian kingdoms like Venice and Genoa caught the plague first, they also shook it first. Combine that with Italian trading ties with the East, and it's no wonder that this area was the birthplace of the Renaissance, or the rebirth of Europe from the disorder of the medieval world. This golden age saw scholars rediscover the classic works of Greece and Rome. Thanks, Byzantine and Islam. The humanism movement shifted focus from religious issues to worldly secular subjects. Guess it's natural to enjoy life when you're part of the 2/3 that actually survived. The Renaissance is most famous for its artists: Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael. They created works, not just for the church like in the era before, but for wealthy patrons like the Medicis of Florence. Author Niccolò Machiavelli wrote The Prince, a guide for gaining and keeping absolute power. And slowly but surely, the Renaissance would expand throughout Europe, influencing figures like Cervantes in Spain, the German Albrecht Dürer, and an English author named Shakespeare. All these new ideas in literature would soon tear Europe in two, ironically enough during a period when the world would come together like it never had before, for better or worse. But that's next episode, Reformation and Exploration. Take your quiz, make sure you like and subscribe, be safe, and I'll see you next time. Hey now, it's the penultimate episode of MrBettsClass Global Final Review, and today we're going to divide Europe while multiplying it across the globe. It's Reformation and Exploration, and it's time to get moving. Remember last episode when we said the Catholic Church became the most powerful entity in Europe? Well, eventually the Church started to abuse some of that power. One of the ways that it did this was through the exchange of money for indulgences, or a reduction in punishment for sins. This was seen by many as the Church becoming more interested in secular issues like money and political power. Some protested these actions and called for reforms. See what I did there? Yeah, the Protestant Reformation. And the most famous figure of the Protestant Reformation was Martin Luther. A German monk, Martin Luther had it with what he considered to be the abuses of the Catholic Church. In Germany, 1517, he nailed his 95 Theses, or arguments, to a church door for all to see. This angered the church enough as is, but soon the 95 Theses were used in conjunction with a device new to Europe, the printing press. Now, prior to the 15th century, all books in Europe were handwritten, so as you can imagine, there weren't many books and there were even fewer people who could read them. But with the introduction of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg, more books were made, leading to more literacy. The most popular book, the Bible, which ironically was bad news for the church. Before, the only people that could read the Bible and thus offer salvation were clergy. Now, individuals began to read it for themselves and question how the church operated. And when Luther's 95 Theses were reprinted, his arguments and ideas spread as if they were at the top of everyone's Facebook newsfeed. Others began to challenge the church as well. The Swiss reformer John Calvin also rejected the church's ways and believed in predestination, or the idea that God already knew who would and wouldn't be saved. Another leader broke away from the church for political rather than religious reasons, Henry VIII. This English king wanted to annul the marriage to his wife Catherine, citing lack of son. To do this, he needed the Pope's approval, and when asked, the Pope said no. So Henry said, fine, I'll take England and start my own church, the Anglican Church, with yours truly at the top. Fighting between Catholics and different Protestant sects would rage on for centuries, but a much more deadly conflict was brewing on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. While basically all our previous episodes were happening, civilizations had taken root in the Americas. The first inhabitants crossed the now-covered land bridge from what we'd call Russia to Alaska about 12,000 years ago. Over millenniums, they migrated across 2 continents, creating hundreds of different tribes. Yeah, the term Native American is about as specific as the term European. One particular civilization were the Maya living in Mesoamerica that developed their own writing system and calendars. The Aztecs of Mexico made similar advances, as well as the huge city of Tenochtitlan. And the Incas, centered in the Andes Mountains of Peru, linked their huge empires with 25,000 miles of roads and engaged in terrace farming. So what happened? Europe happened. Due Due to the Silk Road and the Crusades, Europeans got a taste of Asian goods and they wanted more. Advances like the compass, astrolabe, cartography, and new ship designs allowed them to take to the seas looking for new trade routes. The Portuguese headed south around Africa, with Bartholomew Diaz being the first to round the Cape of Good Hope, while the Spanish, taking a chance on some captain named Columbus, looked westward. Lucky Columbus, instead of dying in the middle of the ocean, came across what would eventually be identified as two new continents. Luck for Columbus, but not for the natives. Soon, mercenaries called conquistadors like Hernan Cortez and Francisco Pizarro came over in search of gold and glory, and missionaries spread the word of God, often by force. An encomienda system allowed Spanish farmers to use natives for forced labor. Indigenous cultures were 90% wiped out by guns and steel, but mostly by disease. This transfer of disease and technology, as well as foods and animals between Europe and the Americas, is known as the Columbian Exchange. Soon, Spain, as well as the Portuguese, English, Dutch, and French had colonies in the Americas, and were engaging in mercantilism, where the economic idea that the colonies existed only for the mother country. That's why raw materials mined or grown in the Americas were sent back to Europe to be made into goods sold to the colonies or to new markets in Africa. Lastly, many African buyers paid for these goods in slaves that were sent on a voyage across the Atlantic Ocean called the Middle Passage that completed this triangle trade. Well, there's the birth of the early modern world. It ain't pretty, I know. Hopefully our next episode, the last of this series, ends on a better note. Come back for absolutism and enlightenment, be safe, and I'll see you next time. Although we've come to the end of the road, it's the 10th and final episode of MrBettsClass Global Final Review Series 1. Everything has led up to this being today's topic, intellectual revolutions and absolutism. So let's do this. We've already talked about the Renaissance and the rise of humanist worldviews, but when it came to science, change was met with a lot of adversity. The accepted theories from the days of Greece and Rome had seemed to make sense, and more importantly, the church had signed off on them. To question them would be to question the church, and with all the excommunication and inquisitions and whatnot, it often ended poorly. Take the heliocentric theory. Before, everyone believed in a geocentric model of the universe, putting the Earth in the middle of everything with the sun and moon and planets rotating around it. It seemed to make sense because if man was made in the image of God, why wouldn't he be placed in the middle of everything? But some began to question that idea. Nicholas Copernicus studied planetary movement, theorizing a heliocentric or sun-centered model. Knowing the uproar it would cause, he only published his ideas while on his deathbed in 1543. Other scholars like Johannes Kepler built on this idea, proving that planets moved in elliptical orbits. But when Italian scientist Galileo Galilei observed, proved, and published his work on the heliocentric model, the Catholic Church, already hurting from the Protestant Reformation, made him recant under the threat of torture and excommunication. Eventually the Church would relent, eventually being 359 years later. This scientific revolution began to spread. Deliciously named Francis Bacon wrote of the scientific method, which stressed experimentation or empiricism. René Descartes advocated the use of reason to arrive at basic truths. Consistent overachiever Isaac Newton basically invented his own brand of calculus, explained gravity, discovered the 3 laws of motion, and most importantly, had the smarts to attribute all this to God and thus avoided persecution. With the help of the printing press, these new ideas began to spread, and the belief that logic and reason could uncover the natural laws of science was soon applied to a new arena, society. Philosophers of the Enlightenment or Age of Reason wanted to use the scientific method for government, religion, and economics. John Locke claimed all people had natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and if a government didn't protect those rights, it could be overthrown. Baron Montesquieu called for the separation of powers to prevent tyranny. Wise guy Voltaire pushed for freedom of speech and religion, and Rousseau and Hobbes each tried to define the nature of what they called the social contract. Now, why was all this necessary? Well, Europe in the 16th through 18th centuries could be an absolute drag. Ha ha. Bad joke aside, Europe was full of absolute monarchs. Absolute meaning total or complete, and monarchs meaning king. Usually, all respects to Catherine the Great. Whereas the power was spread out during the feudal Middle Ages, strong monarchs centralized their power and didn't feel like sharing. Louis XIV, France's longest reigning monarch, never called the Legislative Assembly, the Estates General, into session and instead proclaimed, "I am the state." Most believed in their divine right to rule, or that power came directly from God. The absolute monarch, Philip II of Spain, saw himself as the savior of Catholicism, sending his Spanish Armada up to Protestant England, where it stunningly lost in an upset on par with 1980's Miracle on on ice. Absolutism wasn't just confined to Europe. The Ottoman Empire's Suleiman the Magnificent used his absolute power to expand into Turkey and North Africa. But perhaps the most important event of the age of absolutism happened in England. All the way back in 1215, when King John was forced to sign the Magna Carta, English monarchs needed to follow the law. But in the 15 and 1600s, absolute monarchs abused their powers. Couple this with religious tensions stemming from alternating Catholic and Protestant rulers, and England erupted into civil war. Even when the anti-king side won, Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth was such a drag that they actually restored the monarchy that promptly went back to abusing their power. Fed up, in 1689, English Parliament invited royal-related William and Mary to take the throne in what's called the Glorious Revolution. Glorious because it was non-violent for once. They did have to agree to a Bill of Rights which limited their power and made England a true constitutional monarchy. And this revolution would echo in the political revolutions for centuries to come. But that's a story for another day. I want to thank all of you for supporting this project. For those of you taking exams, good luck. For those of you just trying to get smarter, good on you. Be safe, and I'll see you next time.